We are here in Portland. We're welcoming David Chandler. He's a physics teacher, and David will be presenting a paper at the American Association of Physics Teachers here in Portland. It's a 4-day event, all kinds of awards and mingling with physics teachers. He's here to present his presentation on the collapse of the World Trade Center buildings on 9/11, and we want to hear what he has to share with us about physical evidence of the collapse of the buildings on 9/11. Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Chandler. I teach physics, and from the very beginning, when I was starting to look at the collapses of the World Trade Center buildings, I looked at them and they didn't look right to me. Of course, they don't look right to a lot of people. But I knew that just saying, well, they don't look right to me doesn't persuade very many people or anything. In fact, how do I even know that I'm seeing it correctly? Because we haven't really seen this kind of an event before. So what you need to do to scientifically look at an event like this is to take measurements and try and see how this holds up. Are the dynamics of the collapse something that makes sense? One of the first things I did was I noticed that as the buildings came down, I was thinking in particular of the North Tower. That's the one with the mast on top. As it started to come down, it didn't look like it was crumbling down. Things were shooting out sideways at tremendous speeds. And the very first thing I did is I just took a ruler up to the television screen and estimated, just when taking some timings, and I looked up some distances on the internet, and I did an estimate of how fast some of the heavy chunks of material were being thrown sideways. And right off the bat, I came up with an estimate of over 60 miles an hour. And that was a crude estimate, but it was something that really hooked me in. And as I started looking at it more, I figured, how can you get something so massive being thrown sideways at that kinds of speeds? Actually, if you take the top of the building coming down, by the time the top of the building had come down to the level where those things were thrown out, it was moving slower than these things were moving sideways. So it was quite apparent to me that something unusual was going on. I measured various other things and just tried to find what I could make of this phenomena. 9/11 is a very significant event, and it's worth looking into because so much has been staked on this. We have wars that have been started over 9/11, and we have this whole policy of war on terror and torture, all these things, the setting aside of human rights and American civil rights. And so it's something that you can't just brush aside lightly. One of the tools that I use in the classroom for analyzing motion is it's a video analysis kind of a thing where you can put a dot on each frame of a video and follow the way something moves. Like if you drop a ball and put a dot for each position frame by frame, the timing of the frames versus how far it moves, you can measure things like speed and acceleration and so forth. So I did this using the videos of the World Trade Center that I just downloaded off the internet. And one of the things that I found was Building 7, which was the third building that came down in New York that day, in the evening about 5:20. The roof line came down very, very close to Freefall. Now, my early measurements of this, I didn't have a lot of precision because I didn't have accurate knowledge of actual dimensions. I knew the width of the building was 100 meters, but the left edge of the building was in the smoke, and so I had to guess at that. But I got a measurement that was in the very, very close ballpark to the acceleration of gravity. So free fall is if you just drop a rock, you just let go, and that's how the rock comes down. And that's what I saw happening with the World Trade Center 7. Now, in 2008, NIST, which is the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and this is the official government agency that was in charge of analyzing the building collapses. NIST came out with their Building 7 report, And in that report, they gave some measurements, and the height of the roof line and the height of a certain floor. And so I was able to identify those on my video, and that gave me a much better calibration, and so I could improve my video. So I took a new measurement, and it basically came out right on the money, very, very close to the acceleration of gravity. Now that is a really anomalous kind of a result, because this is a building crushing itself, supposedly, falling through itself as fast as if you just took a rock and let go and let it drop. And the problem with that is, if a thing is falling, when it's up here at a high position, it has what we call potential energy. And as it falls, that potential energy is converted into motion. It's called kinetic energy. And if all of that potential energy converts into kinetic energy, you have free fall. If any of that potential energy is used for something else, such as breaking up the building or moving things around, pushing stuff around, then there is less energy available for downward motion. And so it can't be in free fall. It'll be moving slower than free fall because not all that energy is available. Some of it got used for other purposes. Okay, so that's the basic physics of it. That if you see free fall occurring, the free falling object cannot be doing any work on anything else. And so if the building is being destroyed, and if things are being pulverized, beams are being broken up, girders are being, broken up and thrown around, it can't be the falling part of the building doing it. Something else has to be doing it to clear the way for the free-falling section of the building. So it basically makes a physical impossibility. Once you see that the building is falling in on itself at free fall, you absolutely know that something else is destroying the building. So this is a real smoking gun. Now, NIST, in this report they did in 2008, in August of 2008, this was their draft report for public comment. And in this report, they said the building came down 40% slower than free fall. Now, that's just blatantly a lie, because there's no way that if you can measure it, it's right out in plain view. Anybody can see it, and anybody with the similar kind of competencies that I have in this, say a physics teacher or an engineer or somebody with science knowledge, they should be able to also duplicate the kind of measurements I did, and you can see that it's going to be right on or within only a few percent of the acceleration of gravity. So for them to say 40% slower than free fall was pretty blatantly a lie. Now, later on, I went back and tried to see how they got their measurement. And what they ended up doing, it turns out, is they said it came down to a certain level, is where they ended their measurement. So I started there and worked backwards, and they said it took 5.4 seconds. Well, and you sort of backtrack, and you see after about 3.9 seconds, the building's up at full height, and you go 5.4 seconds, the building's just sitting there doing nothing. And so it's like you start your watch, and it's basically about 2 seconds pass before the collapse begins. They're claiming there's a lot of internal collapse going on, but that's really irrelevant to this point, because if you see something falling, what you have to do is take the measurements of that period of fall. It doesn't really matter what else is going on. And so maybe the internal structure of the building was being demolished earlier. In fact, it probably was. There were definitely processes going on that were pulverizing the interior of the building. But this building, the motion that they were saying that was 40% longer than free fall was used to try to deny that the building entered free fall. I got an opportunity to ask a question when they held a technical briefing conference. And so this was on the internet. I got a password sent to me about 5 minutes before the thing started. I had applied for it earlier, thinking no way was I going to be given a chance, because I'm just a physics teacher at a high school. But hey, they did it. They gave me a password, and I just asked a very simple question, literally 5 minutes before I was ready to walk out the door and go to school that morning. And I just basically said, how can you take something that's such a publicly visible, easily measurable quantity as this and set it aside? And they stumbled all over that. And the video of that is on the internet, on YouTube. My website, by the way, is 911speakout.org. And I basically have put a whole bunch of videos there. And I really encourage you to, if you have the kind of interest in more of a scientific knowledge of what's happening here, I sort of explain things. I mean, I'm used to explaining things to high school kids, so it's not like I'm trying not to shoot over everybody's heads, but I do hit the science out there. So this, if you want to see a scientific explanation of what's going on, that would be a good place to start. I also want to put in a mention here that a number of us are working on a project. We're going to take all my videos and put them on a DVD that's going to be coming out soon. So if you look at my site, there's information about that too. So in any case, that was one of my early measurements that if people out there know my name, it's probably because of that confrontation I had with NIST. It developed into a 3-part video, by the way. The first one I talked about the event. The second one was where I started talking about it was while I was making this series of videos that I realized I don't really know how they came up with their 40% greater than freefall. So I went back and figured out where they started, and it's hilarious. I mean, it's like they're starting the clock and nothing happens, and nothing happens, and nothing happens, and about 2 seconds later the building comes down. And for them to try and turn that into some kind of a valid measurement, it's just ludicrous. And the third part of the series was explaining the significance of freefall and try to round out the picture there. There's another analysis I did that actually I published a paper about it, and it's in the Journal of 9/11 Studies. And that's about the North Tower. The two towers, the Twin Towers. The North Tower is identifiable as has a mast on top. It's the first building that got hit. It's the second one that came down. And it got hit pretty close to the top. So there's only about a dozen or so floors above the point that broke off somehow and started to come down. And the big question is, how did this small top section of the building manage to crush the huge section of the building underneath it? Now, the thing that most people in the general public have latched onto is what was put out on a NOVA program very early on, and they talk about pancaking collapse of the floors. Well, NIST rejected that themselves. And the reason is, if you pancake the floors, this building, these two towers, had tremendous internal structure to it. And this was lied about in some of the early information that was put out. But you have the perimeter columns around the outside, and then you have 47 very massive columns going through the center, which are very heavily cross-braced. And these act as like a building within a building. And if you had pancaked all those floors down, the core structure would still be sitting there. And you would have seen the core structure, the full height of the core, there's no way of tearing that down from a pancaking collapse. And NIST realized this, and so they rejected the pancake theory. And they said what happened was the top section of the building acted as a pile driver, that it crushed the core. Somehow it fell a couple of floors, picked up enough speed that it was able to cause the core to fail, and then it came down like that. This was actually developed by an engineering professor, Professor Bazant, in a paper that was released literally a day or two after 9/11. And NIST then relied on Bazant's analysis for their account of how this happened. Anyway, it can't happen. And that's what my analysis is about. What happens is, if you have a block that's falling, we're just simplifying it for this model here. Think of it as a falling block somehow crushing what's underneath. Okay. When the things hit, they're going to, let's think of it something you can imagine. Take a hammer hitting a nail. When the hammer head comes down on the nail, what's happening is the hammer drives the nail into the wood. The nail is exerting an equal force upward on the hammer, which causes the hammer head to come to rest, which is why you have to pick the hammer head up again and hit it again. And so every time you hit the nail goes in a ways, but the hammer head comes to rest. And by then repeated blows, it's able to drive the nail. And if you've ever actually seen a pile driver at work, that's like making pilings for a dock out there. What they have is a big heavy thing that comes down, and it has to hit repeatedly to drive this block down into the sand or whatever, down to make a dock like that. So a pile driver works on the same principle as a hammer. Well, the problem is, I measured the roof line of the top section of the tower, and as it's coming down, it accelerates downward the entire time. Okay? So if it's accelerating downward, it never hits the bottom section of the building. And so the actual analysis I did was I said, okay, if the acceleration is downward, I looked at the forces that had to be at work, and if it's a downward acceleration, there has to be a net force that's downward, which means it turns out that the resistive force had to be less than gravity. I have a video analysis of this on my website, and if you want to read the paper, I actually have the original paper and sort of an annotated version of the paper on the website. You can look at it there. But the bottom line, what it comes out is that the force of interaction between the two sections of the building is actually less than the force you would get if the top section were simply sitting at rest on top. That's so counterintuitive. You think that a falling mass would have to deliver a blow that would be stronger than simply the weight of the thing sitting there. But in fact, since it's accelerating downward the whole time, it's not true. It's actually exerting less force than if it were simply sitting there. And it's you pretty much have to go back and look at the details of that. And if I had a chalkboard here, I could show it pretty easily, but it's all spelled out both in the video and also in the paper. Those are my two analyses that I have done the most with. So the analysis of Building 7, the measurement and the analysis of Building 7, and then the measurement and the analysis of Building 1, the North Tower coming down. So those are the things I'll be speaking about at this at the conference that's happening this week. It's the American Association of Physics Teachers. It's an organization I'm a member of by being a physics teacher. We share ideas and we share ways that we can improve our own understandings of things as well as how to teach better. So anyway, this is some of what I've been able to contribute to the truth movement. It's very important that we focus on actually learning and understanding and communicating the truth of what happened on 9/11. It's far too significant of an event to just let pass away into history. A lot of people ask me, why do I keep putting my energy into this, and is this going to go anywhere? And one of the things I fall back on is a quote from Gandhi. And I just wanted to share this. Gandhi said, whatever you do, it will be insignificant, but it's very important that you do it. This kind of insight that I have into 9/11 simply comes out of the fact that I looked at what's happening, I paid attention to it, and I brought the skills to it that I have by virtue of my own training. There's a lot of people out there who have the same kinds of skills or even greater skills. I mean, there are lots of people with greater skills than I do. A lot of people I talk to, they're an engineer or someone, and they don't even know that 3 buildings came down in New York. I mean, they haven't really looked into it, or they have been taken in by the stigma that somehow if you pay attention to this, it means you're some sort of a lunatic or something. Well, I don't think it's being a lunatic to be concerned about what's happening to this country and how we're being governed and how we are being lied to on such a regular basis. So I do think that it's significant. It's important to actually to go there, not to just sort of brush it aside. And if you have capacity to understand this on some level, do that. Study it, bring your own skills and expertise into it, and see what you can come up with yourself. But I knew that just saying, well, they don't look right to me, doesn't persuade very many people or anything. In fact, how do I even know that I'm seeing it correctly? Because we haven't really seen this kind of an event before. So what you need to do to scientifically look at an event like this is to take measurements and try and see how this holds up. Are the dynamics of the collapse something that makes sense?
We are here in Portland. We're welcoming David Chandler. He's a physics teacher, and David will be presenting a paper at the American Association of Physics Teachers here in Portland. It's a 4-day event, all kinds of awards and mingling with physics teachers. He's here to present his presentation on the collapse of the World Trade Center buildings on 9/11, and
estimated, just when taking some timings, and I looked up some distances on the internet, and I did an estimate of how fast some of the heavy chunks of material were being thrown sideways. And right off the bat, I came up with an estimate of over 60 miles an hour. And that was a crude estimate, but it was something that really hooked me in. And as I started looking at it more, I figured, how can...
We want to hear what he has to share with us about physical evidence of the collapse of the buildings on 9/11. Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Chandler. I teach physics, and from the very beginning, when I was starting to look at the collapses of the World Trade Center buildings, I looked at them and they didn't look right to me. Of course, they don't look right to a lot of people. One of the first things I did was I noticed that as the buildings came down, I was thinking in particular of the North Tower. That's the one with the mast on top. As it started to come down, it didn't look like it was crumbling down. Things were shooting out sideways at tremendous speeds. And the very first thing I did is I just took a ruler up to the television screen and